Things might seem like they're going to hell in a handbasket these days, as the saying goes, but you might be surprised to hear it's not as bad as it used to be. Going back to 1950, when they started counting murders, I guess, today's homicide rate is far below its peak. We're closer to how things were in the mid-60s these days. Back in 1970, 1980, and 1991, things were really bad, like there were twice as many murders than today. And, dear American, you think things are bad in your hood? Check out the murder rates in other countries. Now, we'll go into this a little bit later, but for perspective, El Salvador has 11 times more murders per capita than the USA. In fact, it's kind of a Central American Caribbean sweep for highest murder rates, outside of a couple of African nations. We're way down here, somewhat near as many murders per capita as Greenland and Samoa. The least murdery country? There's a handful of small countries where nobody got murdered last year, and then Japan, where hardly anybody gets murdered ever. I guess they don't have guns there? Today in America, you have about a 1 in 20,000 chance of being murdered, but that number is much higher if you live in the cities we're going to talk about. So, lock your doors as we go through America's Murder Capitals 2020. Alright, let's get started here. First up on our murder capital tour of the US is Newark, New Jersey. Here in Newark, there were a total of 75 murders, which may or may not sound like a lot, but for a city of 282,000 people, that's a lot. For perspective, the entire state of West Virginia only had 67. You have a 1 in 3,000 chance of being killed in Newark every year. And get this, that's actually way down from the peak in 1960. That means Newark is safer now more than ever, and it's still really bad here. Apparently, they've been cracking down here in Newark, with aid coming from the FBI, State Attorney's Office, and New Jersey State Police. Newark PD has even resorted to providing haircuts for kids for school, giving away turkeys and coats along with school supplies to quell the violence. But the kids aren't the ones shooting people? If you don't want to get killed, stay in the north and east parts of Newark. If you want to be killed, then go to the south and west parts of Newark. Downtown is apparently better, but still nowhere near safe. Outside of Camden, Trenton, Atlantic City, and Patterson, the rest of the state's pretty safe, since as a whole, New Jersey's the 5th safest state in the US. Where are we heading next? Let's follow this paramedic to Kansas City, Missouri, aka KCMO, aka KC Ghetto, at least in some parts. Here in Kansas City, Missouri, there were 137 murders last year. That's more than the whole state of Massachusetts. What's going on here, people? It's getting worse here, at least lately. Last year, the city nearly broke a record for murders, which it had set 2 years prior. And just about every single murder is unsolved, meaning the perps are still on the streets here. The KCPD has been urged to put more homicide detectives on the streets and develop a witness protection program to make it easier for people to come forward with leads. Just as I was writing this, a mass shooting in Kansas City was at the top of the news. I think they said this happened at a Kansas City Chiefs celebration party. Why does sports bring out the worst in people? 2/3 of those killed in Kansas City were black males, contributing to Missouri's #1 ranking for black homicide victimization. Don't worry, Missouri, we'll be back again to visit you again before the end of this video. But for now, we heard some gunshots, so we're going to go en route to the city of Memphis. Here in Memphis, there were 191 murders. What the? That's more than the whole state of Wisconsin in a year. And it's getting worse here too. 2 years ago, Memphis saw 180 people get killed, and then last year it was 187. It's so bad here in Memphis that officials are calling it a crisis. You think? The Justice Department now has a plan to solve problems in places like Memphis. It's called Operation Relentless Pursuit. It's going to involve more money, officers, and technology, and syncing databases to try to figure out a way to catch these killers. If you're watching this from another country, well, yes, the United States has some really terrible, scary places, but nothing like countries like Venezuela, where 8% of all murders happen worldwide. Mexico saw 6% of the world's murders last year. Colombia had 6% of the world's murders. Brazil had 4%, and South Africa had 3%. And here's a troubling stat. 400,000 people were murdered worldwide last year. That's more than died from drowning. Twice as many people, or 800,000, killed themselves last year. If you live in certain Baton Rouge neighborhoods, you might feel like you're in a foreign country. That's because you have a 1 in 2,800 chance of being murdered if you live here. 83 people were homicide victims last year, which was actually down from 2017 when 105 people were killed. That's a lot. This person lives in Baton Rouge and she had some poignant things to say. Crime, violence, mental health issues, racism. I can count on two hands the people worth the investment of a long-term relationship. I hated moving there as a child and I fully loathe the place now. Louisiana can literally break off and float out into the Gulf and I wouldn't care, except I hope Baton Rouge was the first to drown. Damn. The areas in Baton Rouge where most of the murders happen are in low-income areas where high drug use and gangs are prevalent. No surprises there. Hurricane Katrina made the problem worse, apparently.
Did you know Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the world?
I think, maybe, I heard that once, Mappy. Is that really true? Wow, it looks like Louisiana had way more people locked up a few years ago, but it's gone down? What, are they letting people out? Also, Oklahoma took the lead for a minute. In terms of countries, oh yeah, we're number one. The most locked up people of all. So Louisiana does have more people locked up than anywhere else in the world per capita. And look at all the countries that are over capacity for their prisons. Have you ever been to jail, Mappy?
No, never, and I don't plan to.
Yeah, well, I don't think you'd survive very long in there.
Maybe I'd make friends. The other prisoners could use me to find a way to escape.
That's a good point, Mappy. Oh, good old Mappy. Please don't ever wind up in jail. We'll never see you again. We don't have to go very far to get to our next murder capital of the U.S., New Orleans. Here, 119 people were murdered last year that they know of, which is way better than in previous years, like in 50 years. But why? Well, for one, the mayor says her plan on using data-driven police interventions and community outreach is working. The Big Easy was the murder capital of America in '94, and from '94 to 2013, the city averaged 250 murders annually. Oh, but it's still bad here, and it's still more dangerous than in most places in Mexico and Venezuela. Tourists and residents are told to walk in groups. I've been to many areas in New Orleans, and besides just the rundown post-Katrina neighborhoods, you can almost get stabbed just a block off of Bourbon Street while taking a pee by a dumpster. Happened to me. There's rules on what to do so you don't get killed in New Orleans. Stay away from bad neighborhoods, okay. Travel in groups, be home by 1 a.m., don't go to cemeteries, don't look like you're weak, carry a gun, okay. Man, some serious stuff.
Detroit is daring to reach up. Some Detroiters prefer to dwell in these new, self-contained cities within a city. Others in new cooperatives or friendly neighborhoods. Whatever the choice, Detroiters rate their city high for living, working, and sheer enjoyment.
Yeah, Detroit is nothing like that now. Of course Detroit's on this list. This city saw 261 people murdered last year alone, which is more than the whole state of New Jersey, which has a city on this list. And murders are down here too. It's only the first time since 1967 where there were less than 300 killings in this city. Probably because everyone's leaving. Typically a city's crime rate goes up when its population goes down, so Detroit's an interesting case. Hopefully it's a long-term trend. But if you think that's bad, in 1974 there were 714 murders here, and in 91 there were 615. So now's nothing. Of course, population declines left abandoned buildings behind, which have become magnets for the drug trade and angry, mean people. Poverty, crime, shootings, drugs, and urban blight in Detroit are ongoing problems. Poverty-wise, a typical Detroit neighborhood made about 25 grand last year, the second lowest in the country and about half of what the typical American household made. Similarly, its poverty rate of 40% is the second highest in the country, well more than double the national poverty rate of 15%. Birmingham, Alabama is our fourth murder capital of the U.S. That might throw you off since Detroit's only fifth, but if you're measuring actual murders per capita, the numbers don't lie. Here in Birmingham, there were 88 murders, and for a city of just over 200,000 people, that means residents have a 1 in 2,400 chance of being killed every year. You know your city's bad when the Venezuelan government's telling residents to avoid you. How are people being killed in the U.S.? This chart shows that about half of all murders are by a handgun, another 3,000 are by an unidentified gun, 1,500 people were stabbed to death, and then you have bare hands, blunt objects, poisoned? Only 5 people were poisoned last year in the US? That seems low. Now, Birmingham's a very black city, where 2/3 of the population is African American. What percentage of murder victims in the US are black men? Well, according to this chart, black Americans were only slightly more likely to be killed in the US, casting aside the myth that most murders in the US are black on black crimes. Another interesting stat, most murders don't cross racial lines, meaning white people kill white people and black people kill black people. Of all black homicide victims, 86% were male and the average age is 31 years old. 83% of black victims were shot and killed with guns. Here in Jackson, Mississippi, things certainly have been better, especially on the south side of town. There were 78 murders here, which means folks had a 1 in 2,100 chance of being a victim themselves. That's only twice as high as dying in an accidental drowning. Heck, your odds of falling down the stairs and dying is 1 in 1,600. Jackson's crime has been ticking up lately, but look at the last few years. This news channel in Jackson keeps a running tally of Jackson murders, which is sad. Last year ended with a bunch of shootings right on New Year's Eve in Jackson, where people were just randomly shooting into homes. What is going on, people? Which US cities are actually decreasing their murder rates? Well, New York City had like 2,200 murders in 1990, but their murder rate's down by 90%. Chicago peaked in the early 90s as well, though the South Side is notoriously terrible for shootings. San Francisco too, though covered in poop, has seen its homicide rate go down by quite a bit. Who's our homicide runner-up? St. Louis is. Here, more than 194 murders happened last year. For a city of over 300,000 people, that's a lot. You have about a 1 in 1,600 chance of dying in St. Louis every year, and likely by a gun. Way back in the early 90s, there were 100 more murders a year here, and over time murders here have gone up and down, but currently the number of murders each year are as high now as this city's seen since the late 90s. Downtown's pretty nice, at least in the winter months, a fact I can attest since I was just there a month ago. However, the north side of St. Louis is very, very bad, and where most of the problems happen, likely between people fighting over drugs or gang BS or both. St. Louis has a new plan called Cure Violence, which resembles Chicago's plan called Cease Fire. The goal is to treat gun violence like it's a disease and to stop its spread by helping youth see alternatives to violence and by convincing gunshot victims from retaliating. Okay, who's our murder capital of the USA? Baltimore is, or as people have called it, Bodymore Murderland. Here in Baltimore, there were 350 murders last year, which is the highest it's been since 1993, and close to an all-time high. It's also 5 years in a row now that there have been more than 300 murders in Baltimore. You have about a 1 in 1,700 chance of being murdered in Baltimore every year, and much higher in certain parts of the city. This site's been tracking homicides in Baltimore, and the last 100 only goes back to Halloween, and it's January right now. Look at the last mayors of Baltimore. Resigned, didn't run for re-election, resigned, didn't run for re-election. Would you want that job? In Baltimore, the stated targets for busts aren't drug offenses. It's trying to find all the damn handguns. There's similar plans on what to do to curb the violence and murder rates here, but it's all the same thing, and it probably won't work. They've even considered flying surveillance planes over Baltimore 24/7. People say the police aren't as aggressive since the Freddie Gray murders and riots in 2015. Others say it's all the illegal guns laying around. Some say it's a drug crisis. Well, there were 417 mass shootings last year in the US, more than one every day. It's white versus white, black versus black. Lots of people here are sick, and big pockets of inner cities in the US have had a breakdown of morality and family values. When the culture of the streets takes precedence over getting a damn job and being responsible, there's nothing we can do to stop it, except throw them all in jail. Can we do that? Hey guys, if you learned something new or you just like this video, make sure to like it. And if you really like this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get all of our videos about what it's like to live in different places in America. Peace.